Hey everybody, we want to talk about virtues today. Someone asked me a question, or a group of people, the same group kind of asked me some questions. Some other people asked me some questions, and I'm still working on some other things, but that is really vague so far. Anyway, this group of people asked me to talk about virtue. And I, of course, want to talk about virtue. It's a really great thing. What's tricky is that when we talk about virtue, there's any number of different directions that a person could go. So even as I begin talking about this, I know that I'm not going to cover it even the way that I really want to cover it. Because there's so many different ways that we could go. The primary way I want to look here is in these two, we could say like primary categories that are found within the Christian tradition, the Catholic Christian tradition. And these two primary categories are the theological virtues and the cardinal virtues. So there's three theological virtues, which we'll look at, and there are four cardinal virtues. And then from there are other, we could call them like moral virtues. In other words, so let's talk about this. What is virtue? So virtue, if you just type it up into the Google and said define virtue, you would get something that talks about like valor and merit. Living a life of excellence, ultimately, is what we're talking about. And we want to live a life of excellence in our entire life. And so to live a life of excellence in our entire life, of course, we know that that probably takes a lifetime to do. And so what we like to do, at least in the sort of Western world that we live in, is what we call it, I guess. Like, so Western world being, like the United States or North America, I suppose, North America, South America, Western Europe, those kinds of things. So anyway, it's just like a general term that we use. In the Western world, we like to systematize things. So when I, for example, want to look at, okay, how can I live my entire life? How can I let my entire life be enveloped by the gospel? Or even if I'm not a Christian, I mean, I am, but pretending you live in a world where I'm not, even as someone who's maybe not a Christian, I can still strive for excellence in the different ways that I live my life. And so what I like to do is kind of approach my life like it's something of a project. My life isn't actually a project, but we like to do this. Like, okay, well, I'm going to work on this area over here and pursue excellence in that way. So we'll call this area something. We'll give it a name, a particular virtue that I want to strive for. And then after I'm done with that, or even while I'm working on that, I want to look at this part of my life. And then when I'm done with that, I want to look at, so like we like to say like, okay, well, I'm living a mostly virtuous life. So that, like I feel like I'm a man after justice, a man after temperance, and we'll talk about what these are in a minute. But gosh, I don't know, prudence, I'm not quite there yet. Or generosity, like I'm really great at being compassionate or empathetic, but I'm not always generous, so we have all these different words, and they're good words. So just don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying it's a bad thing that we like to kind of break things up into different parts. In fact, I like to live my life in that way. But what I am saying is that sometimes maybe we can be so focused on the different compartments of our lives that we forget that it's not like an exact science in a kind of way, but in fact it's we could say like an art form kind of. So anyway, so as we pursue talking about virtues, we'll make mention of a couple of things at the end, some different moral virtues or some different ways, especially regarding like how to combat against sin. Just like there are so again, a virtue, so living a life in an excellent way out of habit. So that's maybe a more full definition, that I'm pursuing excellence in my habits, in the way that I regularly live my life. Because we all know that we can have moments of really excellent generosity, and then maybe that's not a consistent thing in my life. That I might have a fleeting moment where I decide to be generous with someone, but I don't really have the virtue of generosity. Or I have a fleeting moment where I see an injustice and I want to fight for it, but then maybe in the rest of my life I have all kinds of moments where I don't really want to fight that hard for injustice, or against injustice, I guess. So when we're talking about virtue, we're talking about things that are habitual in our lives, things that are the consistent in our pursuit. And maybe rather than saying maybe I have a fleeting moment of pursuing it, I might have fleeting moments where I fail. But generally speaking, I'm pursuing this thing. And hopefully, I wouldn't even have moments where I fail. But, we all deal with this struggle with sin. And so we might even have moments where we fail. Okay, let's get it. Now, the three theological virtues. So theological, you could imagine what that means. So theological means anything that is of God. So when we're talking about virtues that are theological, we're talking about virtues that are specifically and directly related to God. And it doesn't mean that other virtues are not, but what it does mean is that a person can be virtuous in these other ways that we'll talk about outside of the context of their relationship with God. Of course, we know that when God provides his grace, that these virtues that we'll talk about more in a minute, these virtues, they can be elevated, but But even if I don't have that elevated aspect of his grace, I can still pursue virtue in those particular ways. When we're talking about the theological virtues, these are specifically and directly related to our relationship with God. So that's why we call them that. And these are gifts that God has to give us. I can be a man of justice even if I don't receive that grace, or if I don't pursue that grace from God to be a man of supernatural justice. I can have natural justice as a part of my life. When we're talking about the theological virtue of faith, for example, if God doesn't give that to me, maybe I might have a kind of natural faith in humanity, but that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about faith in God. That's a theological virtue, or the theological virtue of hope in God and what God promises, or love. I can be a loving person to the people around me, but when we're talking about theological virtue of hope, or excuse me, of charity, of love, we're talking about like the kind of love that only God can give. So that's ultimately what we're talking about. So let's break these down just a little bit. So the best way that I like to use analogies, and there's a couple of different analogies that I've been kicking around in my mind, and I guess I just want to try them out. One of them I use on a pretty regular basis. The other one I think might actually fit better. But let's give this a shot. So imagine this. Imagine you wake up in a really dark cave. So you actually don't know how you got there, but you're stuck in this super dark cave. And you can't find your way out. Like, you try really hard, you feel your way around the walls, but you can't see anything. And so, like, you're screaming for help, nothing happens. And so you're working for hours and hours and hours, and nothing happens. And so eventually what happens is your stomach gets really hungry, of course, and your mouth gets really thirsty. But there's no help, there's no way to be rescued. Like, you're stuck. And so you just like realize, like, I think I'm gonna die in here. And maybe for some of us, there's like, okay, the challenge is on. I'm just going to work harder and I'm going to try and find my way. Maybe for others of us, we just want to give up right away, whatever. But no matter what, no matter which person you are in that situation or somewhere in between, you're not getting out. And so you just like sit down and you just like realize, like, okay, I think I'm stuck here. You're dead. And then what happens? Suddenly something happens. You see a little flicker of light, and someone comes right up to you with a torch in his hand. And he looks you right in the eyes and he just says, hey, I can get you out of here. So now you have a decision to make, like a whole bunch of decisions to make all at once. So this man with the torch in his hand, he says, I can get you out of here. Do you believe him? And if the answer is yes, then what does that mean? It means you're saved because you believe in him. You trust that he can actually get you out of here. Now, what's tricky is that he says, okay, I'm gonna get you out of here. You got to come with me. So if you trust in that person, then what? When he turns and walks away, you got to follow after him. And that's ultimately proving your trust in him. So another example, or another analogy, we'll probably bounce back and forth between these two. So another analogy, you are a football player, let's say, and you love playing football, and you want to play professional football, and not only do you want to play professional football, but you want to win a championship, you want to win the Super Bowl. And so being a professional football player, you have your choice of any team to join. Let's just imagine that, okay? You're a world-class football player, you have your choice, and you're just like, okay, I want to find the best coach who's going to lead me to the championship. And so you go around, you interview all the coaches, and you find a coach, and he says to you, I can help you win a championship. But there's a trick. You gotta trust my coaching philosophy. You gotta believe me. Okay, so it's like, okay, I found my coach. I believe in him. And so what does that mean? It means that when you go to practice, well, first you got to go to practice. But then second, when you go to practice, he's going to tell you how to practice. He's going to tell you how to play. He's going to give you the certain plays to play. He's going to give you a certain workout regimen. He's going to give you maybe even a certain diet, a certain way of eating. He's going to get you around your teammates and all these things. And he's going to tell you to do them. And if you believe in him, if you trust him, you're going to buy into his entire system, his entire way of life. Even if you think to yourself, gosh, I don't know that this play is the best play right now, or I don't know that this is the best way to spend time with my teammates or the most productive use of my time. I don't know about those things, but what I do know is that I trust the coach. The same thing with following this man out of the cave is like he's going all over the place. And again, you're just like along for the ride. You have no idea because you don't have a torch and you don't know the way out of the cave. And so he's like following you, and it's just like, gosh, I don't know, And then what's more, as you're going out of this cave, you're going maybe off to the left or right. I don't know which direction you're seeing, but off to your left, you see daylight. But the man with the torch goes off toward the right, and you just stop him and you're like, hey, wait, I think this is the way. And he just says to you, no, do you trust me? Like, do you believe me that I know the way out? Because that's not it. Right? So there's again a moment of decision where it's like, do I believe this man? So when we're talking about the theological virtue of faith, this is what we're talking about. That it is a trust in God that goes beyond doubt. It is a trust in God it leads me to be confident that when he speaks, he is speaking truly. It is the same kind of confidence, although elevated, right? So in the cases of a football coach, in the case of someone leading you out of a cave, as important as those things might be for any given person, when we're talking about God, we're talking about like the championship is heaven, and the end or getting outside of the cave is heaven, is eternal life. So we're not just talking about getting a championship, we're talking about getting an eternal championship. And so as much as I might trust a coach who can lead me to a championship, and as much as I might trust a man who can lead me out of a dark cave, when God speaks, I believe that he speaks truly. And so whatever he tells me to do, I have faith in him. And so whatever he tells me to do, I will do it. I will assent to him. So assent means I will surrender. I will give full authority to this God over my life. So that whatever he tells me to do, even if in my mind there might be moments where I listen to him and I think, gosh, I don't know that I would do it that way. Even in those moments, I say to him, no, I trust you. And so I will assent with my will. You see, this is the thing. As humans, we have minds which can think, and we have wills which can choose, a will which can choose. And so even if in some certain moments my mind doesn't fully assent to what God says, either through his word or through his church, I can still make that assent with my will. This is the thing we're talking about. Like when it's, for example, like when you wake up on a Sunday morning, you're just super tired and you would rather sleep in and skip Mass. You know that the Lord, through his church, teaches that we need to go to Mass every Sunday. And so even though on this particular Sunday morning you're thinking, gosh, I don't feel like I need to go to Mass, I know because I trust in God and what he's given through his church. I trust that. And so I will assent with my will, even if my mind doesn't want to come. Now hopefully my mind does want to come. Hopefully my mind is in line with God, or even if it's not, like, even if my mind isn't in line with God, maybe I can change my mind actually, rather than expecting God to change, because I trust him. He is the one. And I have this theological virtue of faith. And so if I have the virtue of it, that means I am habitually in the habit, right, of what? Of assenting my will and my mind to the mind and will of God, because I trust him and I'm confident in him actually. Again, it's not like gosh, I hope I'm right. No, I'm confident about this. What is Hebrews chapter 11 verse 1 says, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So even though I don't actually have proof that this coach can win me a championship until I actually get to the championship and win it, and even though I don't actually have proof that this man with a torch can lead me out of the cave until I actually get out of the cave, I'm confident. I believe that they can do it. And how much more for God? I don't actually have proof that he can lead me to heaven. But because he's given me this virtue, this gift of faith, because of that, I'm confident in him. And so this is a real thing that sometimes people will look at us and say, gosh, what's the deal? Like, you actually believe that stuff? And you're like, yeah, I don't know that I can prove it. I mean, I can try to give you evidence for why God exists, and I can give you evidence for like the resurrection of Jesus, for example, but I can't directly prove to you in a certitude kind of way that heaven is real. And yet at the same time, I know that it is. Like that's hard for some people to deal with. And yet this is part of the gift, and this is why we need it, And so it's like, if I don't have one of these theological virtues that we're talking about, I got to pray, and I just got to ask, like, Lord, like, this is why in the Gospels one time, Jesus is talking about forgiving your enemies, and the disciples' response is like, Lord, increase our faith. So anyway, that's the theological virtue of faith. I hope that makes sense. Okay, next, the theological virtue of hope. What is hope? Hope is when I have a confidence of attaining the goal. So that is like getting back to our analogy here. When I'm being let out of the cave, and it's like, gosh, this seems like a huge cave, and it's like maybe hours go by, maybe it seems like days go by, or maybe the man with the torch is like, you got to crawl through this tiny little space. And it's just, I don't know that I can fit through this, or you got to jump over this chasm. I don't think I can jump that high, Or even if, like, let's say I try to jump, I don't make it, and I fall into this chasm. Well, if I have the theological virtue of hope, no matter what trials I go through, whether it's trying to and actually being able to fit through a tiny little space, or even when I fail, if I have the theological virtue of hope, then I actually have a confidence that somehow, in some way, this man with the torch, he's going to lead me through it. He's going to bring me to the goal. The same thing with the football coach. is that what if I have the gift of hope or the virtue of hope, then even when practice is really hard, or even when I have teammates that I don't get along with very well, or if it's like I have to change my eating habits and that just stinks, like I don't get the dessert like I'd want, that kind of thing, or it's like, gosh, we have a really tough opponent coming up and it just seems like it's going to be a grind to make it through this game. I don't know, like getting to the championship seems like a really difficult thing. If I have the virtue of hope, I know that it might be hard. I might really know that. And yet at the same time, I have this confidence that going through the difficulty, not trying to get around it, but going through the difficulty is actually it's gonna help me in some way get to the goal. And so now again, these are natural things. When we're talking about a supernatural thing that Jesus gives to us, or that God gives to us, what happens? It's even as I live my life as a Catholic Christian, a faithful Catholic Christian, there are difficulties that we go through. Sometimes not even through our own fault. Like really bad health diagnosis, or different trials in our family, or different things happening, scandals in the church. Different things that can happen to us in our lives. Our own personal failures, and our own personal sins. Sometimes they are our fault. Even though I go through all these things, if I have the theological virtue of hope, I have confidence that even in and through all of these things, sometimes even in a mysterious way, through my own sinful failures, if I have this gift of hope, I actually can be confident that through it all, I'm going to attain the prize, which is eternal life. And it's not that I'm going to attain it. I mean, I am, but it's because the Lord is going to lead me through it. And so somehow he even foresaw this failure in sin. He even foresaw the fact that I would struggle with this habit or with that habit. And yet, as long as I remain faithful to him and as long as I remain confident in him, he is going to lead me to eternal life. And this is actually kind of a tricky thing, because if I don't have this gift, then I might be tempted to fall into despair, which is not a theological virtue at all. Of course, it's like a sin. Ultimately, is when I just give up all hope of my salvation, or I give up all hope of my making it to eternal beatitude. There's on the flip side, there's presumption, which is that no. Like it's kind of like an overconfidence, we could say. Like, no, I don't need to worry about repentance because the Lord's going to bring me to heaven. I don't need to worry about growing in virtue because the Lord's going to bring me to heaven. It's this excessive or maybe disordered or misplaced hope, which is not actually hope, it's presumption. So I got to be kind of careful there. There's like a middle ground to live in. So anyway, that's the theological virtue of hope. And Paul says this actually in Romans chapter 5. Let me just look this up real quick here. So in Romans chapter 5, St. Paul talks about going through trials. Listen to what he says. Therefore, since we are justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Through him we have obtained access to this grace in which we stand, and we rejoice in our hope of sharing the glory of God. More than that, we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not disappoint us, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. So just to understand that faith and hope are actually really closely connected. That because we have this confidence in God, and because we're confident that he speaks truly, it actually, that gift of faith, or that virtue of faith, it spurs us on to walk confidently with God. And in walking confidently with God, this is where hope is found, is that even as I go through suffering, even as I go through different trials, that confidence, I know it's gonna lead to eternity. It's gonna lead to it because I know that the love of God, right, which is the next virtue we'll talk about, the love of God has been poured into our souls, poured into our hearts. And so I can actually be confident in this, in the grace in which we stand. So that, I think, is just a really helpful thing. It actually helps me to see these two gifts kind of put together. It helps me to evaluate things as I live my life in such a way that I can see that the only thing truly worth living for is heaven. Because I might have other things in my life that I might be confident of obtaining, different gifts, different abilities, different experiences that might be really pleasant. But when we're talking about the theological virtue of faith and the theological virtue of hope, it helps us to put all things in perspective, which is to show, like, yeah, these things might be really great, but these things also might hinder my walk with God. And so when I want to prioritize things, what do I want to do? I want to prioritize in such a way that I truly follow the path that leads to heaven. And I can be confident in that because the Lord has shown me the path toward heaven. And I can trust that he's given me the grace to actually walk that path. the path of self-denial, of sacrifice, the path of great love, of generosity, right? So it's like these theological virtues, they in so many ways, like they inform, or they lead toward these other moral virtues, or the cardinal virtues that we'll talk about in a minute. Okay, next, the theological virtue of charity. What does this do? This is a virtue that helps me and helps you to love God above all things simply for his own sake. In other words, what happens? Sometimes we might get caught up in like trying to love God, which of course is a good thing to love God. So it's like getting caught up into that is like this is awesome. But sometimes our motive can get a little bit off, which is not necessarily bad, but sometimes our reason for loving God can be more for what he offers us than simply because he's good. You see that it's maybe a slight difference, and it's not necessarily bad to love him because he can offer us heaven. Like that's not a bad thing at all. Like heaven, of course, is a thing to be desired and to pursued and to be lived for. But can I also see, or maybe even see before that the one who offers me heaven is incredibly generous, and in seeing his incredible generosity, his incredible goodness, can I love him simply for that? So that even if heaven wasn't promised to me, I actually just see that he's good. And so I want to love him in his goodness. Like that's what the theological virtue of love or charity is all about, is that I can love God simply for his own sake. And not just love him, but also remember, what does Jesus say is the great commandment? The great commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, of course, but then also to love your neighbor as yourself. And so if I have this theological virtue of charity, of course I'm going to love God above all things, like truly above all things. That I can't look at anything in my life and say, it seems like there's a competition here between God and this other thing, or God and this other person. No, I love God clearly above all things, and everyone knows it. But then on top of that, to also love my neighbor as myself, to have this charity, this sense of love for other people. And this is where we get into like 1 Corinthians chapter 13, where Paul says, if I do all these things, all these incredible things, speaking in tongues and prophesying, but if I don't have love, I have nothing. I'm a clanging drum or a clanging cymbal. But if I have love, then I have everything. And then that's where he gets into like love is patient and love is kind and love does not boast, it is not rude, it does not put on airs. Those kinds of things. And of course, those are all related to our relationships with other people. And so if I have this theological virtue of love, which is the one that remains, then I'm going to be patient, I'm going to be kind, I'm going to not be rude, but I'm actually going to be generous. You see, so again, it's just like another example of how these three theological virtues, in so many ways, they like lay the foundation for the rest of our lives as virtuous people. Hopefully, and being virtuous people, being excellent, being holy ultimately for the Lord. So those are the theological virtues. Now I want to take just a quick moment. That was maybe a little bit longer. Oh, sorry. So getting back to our analogy, it's like following this person with the torch out of the cave, or following my football coach. Like eventually, what? I'm just gonna love the man with the torch. I'm gonna love him for himself. Like look, man. Even if we don't make it out of here, I trust that we're going to, actually, because I have this great gift of faith that you actually know the way and you're leading me, and I trust that we're gonna get there, even though it's hard. But even if we don't, I love you because you're just so good. Like you actually came to find me, and nobody else did. Nobody else could, but you found me, and I just delight in that. The same thing with the football coach. In a natural way, it's like, look, coach, here's the deal. Even if we lose the championship game, even if we don't make it to the playoffs, I see what you're up to. Like you didn't have to pick me to be on your team, and I just love you for that. I love that you even pursued me, that you even desired like my championship. And again, those are natural things because that actually does happen. That sometimes a lot of times teams don't win the championship. Sometimes people do truly get like lost and are never found. But when we're talking about God, like there is yes this sense of like, no, we even while we can be confident. And this is why there's maybe a little bit of tension here, is because like, well, I don't want to live in a world where I pretend that I don't receive salvation, because provided I have these gifts of faith, hope, and charity, and I'm walking with the Lord, then of course I'm going to love him. But the fact of just trying to like separate that or compartmentalize it for just a moment is that I want to love God simply because of who he is. So anyway, there's that. Okay, now let's move in real quickly to the 4 cardinal virtues. So cardinal, it comes from this word cardinus in Latin, which means hinge. So these are the hinge virtues. So the reason we want to focus on these 4 cardinal virtues is because it is these 4 virtues that ultimately, like we could say, open the door to all of the other virtues that we might be able to name. And to be sure, like we could probably name any number of different virtues, like a wide variety of virtues. Some maybe that it's like, gosh, I don't know if that's a virtue or if that's just, whatever, but it's like, who cares? Like this is the thing. These four cardinal virtues, these four hinge virtues, they open the door to living a virtuous and excellent life. And so I want to pursue more than anything. I want to pursue these as well as ask the Lord to give me his grace so that as I pursue them in a natural way, he actually can supernaturalize them by elevating them to have like extra power to them, extra power which carries with it extra access to God, extra access to the life of grace. So that's what we're talking about. So these four cardinal virtues are what? They're prudence, justice, temperance, and fortitude. Prudence, justice, temperance, and fortitude. These are the four cardinal virtues. So we'll deal with each one of them real quickly. So the virtue of prudence does what? It helps us to know and choose what is the best means for attaining our aims. So in other words, if I have this in a natural way, then it just simply helps me to say like, okay, well, what is it that I want out of life? Like, what is it that I'm shooting for? So in the case, I guess I don't necessarily intend to keep on with these analogies, but let's say like I want to win a football championship. So like if I have the gift of prudence or the virtue of prudence, that means that I'm going to be able to prioritize. Like, what is actually going to best help me to attain my goal of a championship? Or getting out of this cave. Like, what is actually going to best help me attain my goal of getting out of this cave? There might be some things that are good for me, actually. Like, it's probably good to go to practice. It's probably good to get a good night's sleep. Those kinds of things. But there are some things that are probably even more important, or some things that are even better, that I shouldn't just go to practice, but that I should go to practice. And when I'm there, I should be going for it, Like it would be foolish of me to like bring my phone to football practice and like hold my phone in my hand while I'm at football practice. And the coach is like, dude, you got to get out there. I'm like, yeah, no, I'm here. I'm here, coach. Like, you want me to put this down? I don't. Like, so what's the prudent thing to do? What is the best thing to do? And this is actually, I think, a really good virtue to have, to just be able to prioritize, to say, like, I'm going to look at this option or this possibility or this opportunity, and I'm going to be able to evaluate it according to, like, is this actually going to help me to be the person that I want to be? And now again, from a Christian perspective, when I'm looking at prudence, I'm not just looking at prudence from a natural perspective, but I'm looking at it from a supernatural perspective. So again, what is our aim? Well, hopefully our only ultimate aim is heaven. Anything short of that is going to pass away. And so as I am presented with any number of opportunities, any number of possibilities for life as a Christian, as a Catholic Christian, I want to approach each of them from this perspective of like, what's actually going to be best for my salvation here? What's going to be best? And so in some ways, there might be opportunities I have to pass on because I perhaps know that by engaging with this opportunity, I might be tempted toward sin. I might be tempted toward doubt. Or what's more is like not only passing on this, but passing on this for the sake of this thing, which is actually going to help me grow in holiness in a better way. So you could think of some examples that might be super easy. It's like, okay, well, you have the option of going to mass or going to the movies. It's like, well, okay, well, again, from a Christian perspective, I know that going to mass is going to be the better thing, especially if it's a Sunday. But let's say that sometimes there's like, along with that, like let's say it's a movie that you really want to see, like maybe it's a movie in a series that is just like, oh man, I love this series and I want to see it, and this is the last night that it's showing. But then I find out that it's like a holy day of obligation, and it's like, gosh, I don't want to miss this, but I know that this is better for my salvation. And so it's not only just a matter of like the easy decisions, but sometimes it's like I might have to actually deny myself something very real that I like for the sake of choosing what is prudent, what is virtuous for me. So anyway, so there's that. Okay, so that's going to include all kinds of things like my thoughts, my motives, my affections, my sentiments, my choices. And as I do this, as I go through any particular situation, I want to make sure that I'm deliberating, like that I'm actually reflecting on like what's best here, what good is in this and what good is in this and which one is best. And then from there, I got to actually make a choice. And then from making my choice, it's not enough to just say like, well, but I know this is better. Then I actually have to go and execute that choice. I have to do it. So to deliberate, to make a choice, and then to execute my choice. That's going to be all that is involved in making a prudent decision, a virtuous decision. Okay, next, justice. Justice helps us to give to others what is due to them. So in other words, this is the thing that as humans, we interact in a human way. We interact in the world in all kinds of different ways. And so sometimes we take on tasks. Sometimes we employ ourselves out to others. Sometimes we employ others. Sometimes we do things that just like have attached with them certain conditions or certain responsibilities. And so as a virtue of justice, we want to pursue what is due to others. And so this is the case in society. So like to ask the question, like, what do I owe society? What do I owe the larger group of humanity maybe? What do I owe my town? What do I owe my state? What do I owe my church? So in a corporate kind of way, but then also in an individual kind of way. You know, like, okay, I work for this person. What do I owe this person as I work for him or her? Or this person works for me. And so what do I owe this person who works for me? You know, those kinds of things. So to ask that question, like, what is truly just here that I want to pursue? So we're talking about things like temporal goods, so like resources, material goods, money, those kinds of things. But then we're also talking about things that are immaterial, like someone's good name. I owe it to the people around me to strive to uphold their good name, to strive to uphold their honor. Why? Because they're human. They're human, made in the image and likeness of God. Even if they're not living a virtuous life, even if they're living a wicked life, I owe it to them to try to uphold their good name. Now, they might ruin it themselves, and that's for them to choose. But from my perspective and from your perspective, we owe it to them to try to uphold their good name, to try to uphold their honor. And then, of course, when we're talking about justice, we're talking about ultimately like our relationship with God. What do we owe to God? And when we talk about this question, what do we owe to God? We're ultimately getting into like a subcategory of virtue, which is the virtue of religion, this is kind of a fascinating thing. That we're talking about like something that maybe the world doesn't really like, actually, which is religion. And here, as Catholic Christians, we're talking about something which we would call a virtue, the virtue of religion, of offering to God, of giving to God what we truly owe him, what is his due. So anyway, I think that's just kind of fascinating to think about. And of course, where can we look to find that? We can find that in the Catholic Church, and in the church that Jesus established, to say the church can actually teach me what I owe to God. And so by following the precepts of the church, the laws of the church, then I can actually be confident that I'm offering to God in justice. I'm offering to him what is his due. Okay, justice. So prudence, justice. Now let's move to fortitude. So fortitude does what? Fortitude helps us to pursue the good with ardor. In other words, with energy. To pursue what is good, even when it's hard, actually. So this is actually one of the virtues that and for that, it's also a gift of the Holy Spirit. This is one of the gifts, one of the virtues that I think our world is desperately in need of. That is people who have like something of a habit of determination, of courage, and of steadfastness. Like we need this so many times in our culture, and I know this in my own life, that we might pursue something that is good, but the moment we meet resistance, we have a real temptation to just back off, to let off the gas pedal and to say, that's too hard. I better try something else. And I know this to be the case in my own life, that I might strive to, for example, live with greater silence in my life. But the moment I get just a little bit bored, what do? I pull up my phone. You're just like, oh man, I need this virtue of fortitude to just like hang in there for just a little bit longer so that I can cultivate greater silence in my life. Those kinds of things, this virtue of fortitude. And then underneath the virtue of fortitude, there may be other like sub-virtues that we could talk about. So things like magnanimity, which is like this great souledness, this sense of like, I know that I'm made for more. And so knowing that I'm made for more, I'm made to pursue it with energy, even though I know that it's going to be hard. Another sub-virtue of patience, which is that so patience could also be called like long suffering. The sense of like it's similar to magnanimity, but maybe a little bit different from a different perspective, which is that it's hard, and I know that there might be failures on the part of other people, failures on my own part, and so I just want to be patient with myself, patient with the people around me. Then also there's constancy, this sense of just like, I'm going to stick with it. No matter how many times I fail, no matter how hard it is, I'm just going to stick with it. I'm going to be steadfast about it. And then a last sort of sub-virtue would be what's called munificence. What is munificence? It's the sense of like being big-hearted. Like, we know people like, gosh, that person, he's just got a big heart. Like, and he's got a big heart for other people. He's got a big heart for God. Like, he just like, there's something about him that it just seems like he has a lot of love to give. And what a gift that is. And it's the kind of thing that just says, like, I want to pursue that myself. So anyway, so where have we been so far? Prudence, justice, fortitude. Next, we'll finish with temperance. So the virtue of temperance helps us to moderate our attraction towards sense pleasures. Moderate our attraction towards sense pleasures, especially pleasures of the palate and pleasures of the flesh. So here's the deal. Of course, we're human. We've talked about this. And being human, we have our five senses. Our sense of touch, our sense of hearing, our sense of sight and smell and taste. And being sensible people, what happens? Sometimes we experience things that are very pleasant to our senses. Sometimes, of course, we experience things that are not pleasant to our senses, but this particular virtue of temperance, we're talking about things that are pleasant to our senses. And so what can happen is sometimes I might find something that is very pleasant to my senses, and that thing, if I'm not virtuous, can easily consume me. It consumes my desires, it consumes my attention, my thoughts. It can consume every part of me. Basically, like, I will not be satisfied until I have it. Until I have more of it, for that matter. And so, of course, it makes sense that we're talking about things of the palate, like the things that we eat, the things that we drink, but then also the senses of the flesh. Like how many people do we know? And there's many people in our world today who are just consumed with the desire for sex, in different forms. And so what if we don't have the virtue of temperance? Then that desire it's going to truly consume us and occupy our minds. I know people who because of different addictions that they have, like they just can't rest, or if they find themselves restless, they won't be able to get to a place of rest until they get their next hit of whatever it is online, or whatever it is with their significant other. And so like that person or those people are desperately in need of temperance, actually. So when we're talking about temperance, we're talking about, of course, chastity, but chastity in mind, so that again, it's like, sometimes women have this mentality of like, well, I can think about it, but as long as I don't actually do it, then it's okay. No, even in my mind, I want to grow in self-control of my mind. But then also in my body. And that actually relates, even if a person is married, there's meant to be a sense of chastity even within marriage. That's probably a separate topic for something else. But to understand, like, I want to have my body, even my desires, my sexual desires, regulated. And so to live with them in a regulated kind of way, so that again, it's not just like I want what I want when I want it, and if I don't have it, I'm going to be upset, or I'm going to be irritated or agitated. But instead, it's like, no, like I'm a well-regulated person, and so there are times when yes, of course, I'm happy to engage if it's an appropriate sort of situation. But there are also times where it's like, maybe I want to, but I don't need to, because I'm regulated. I'm living in a chaste life. And then, of course, for a person who's not married, then we're talking about chastity. We're talking ultimately about like continence or celibacy, for that matter. So like for me as a Catholic priest, I might have desires, and I have desires, but it's never a sense of like, oh, I can give in to them now because I've got temperance. No, it's like, as a celibate man, I can never really give in to those desires. I need to pursue temperance in kind of an absolute kind of way, in the sense. Okay, so that's it. But then, of course, we're also talking about like humility, which is to just say, like, I want to even be controlled about the way that I think about my self-worth. Which again might go both ways. In our world, we have lots of people who feel like they have no self-worth. And so to actually be temperate is to say, actually, no, I know in humility, in truth, that I do have worth. And so I want to be measured about that. But then also there are other people in our world who live with maybe an excessive sense of self-worth. And so for those people, to be temperate is to say, actually, I'm not that important. Yes, I know that I'm important in God's eyes, but in terms of like the grand scheme of society, like maybe I'm not that important. And so I just need to lower myself, bring myself down a little bit so that I can see myself in a true perspective. And then, of course, with temperance, we're talking about meekness. So meekness, what is meekness? Meekness is a sense of self-mastery, like power, recognizing that I have certain powers, but I want to have those powers under control. I have certain desires, but I don't have those desires under control. Also, I want to have a tolerance of the failings of others. How many times you and I might be tempted to hold a high standard for ourselves, which is not a bad thing, but then to hold a high standard for other people, and when other people don't meet that standard, we might become intolerant of them. Now, I know this word tolerance in our culture right now, it's maybe it's sort of politically charged, but just to understand, like, no, people fail. And when they fail, I don't want to freak out. I don't want to lose control of myself. But instead, I want to be able to tolerate that, okay, no, you're failing and it's not great, and maybe I need to correct you, but I'm not going to do it with this maybe excessive sense of anger or those kinds of things. And then meekness also means forgiveness of injuries, recognizing that people fail, of course, and sometimes those failures directly impact us. And sometimes it's not just that they fail, it's that they intentionally choose to injure us. And so if I'm meek, if I have this sense of temperance, it's like, no, even there, I don't want to lose my cool. I don't want to get out of hand, even with the justice perhaps that is owed to me. But instead, I want to be able to forgive and let go. And then very lastly, benevolence toward all. In other words, this sense of goodness, this kind of getting back to like what we experience with justice, this sense of just like big-heartedness toward all people. I don't want to take too much toward myself, but instead I just want to be focused on giving a proper measure to people all around me. Okay, so those are the 4 cardinal virtues. And from those cardinal virtues, we can kind of see a door open to see other moral virtues. And we don't have time to get into other moral virtues, but I actually want to give you a couple of really great resources. So basically everything that I just shared with you, I got from this book, which I think I've shared with you before. It's called The Spiritual Life. And what I think we need, we've had the Bible in a Year podcast, we've had the Catechism in a Year podcast, both with Father Mike Schmitz. I think we need a Spiritual Life in a Year podcast. So someone's got to get a hold of Father Mike Schmitz or Ascension Press or whatever and get. So this book is incredible. It's from a guy named Adolphe Tanqueray, who's dead now, so he can't do the Spiritual Life in a Year podcast. But anyway, it's just a great book, and it's a very systematized working of the spiritual life that just helps a person understand like what is the spiritual life? Like, what are we talking about? How do I live the moral virtues? How do I live the theological virtues? What are the different gifts of the Holy Spirit? There's so many really good things, and I'm just kind of slowly working my way through it right now. So I had to jump ahead to get to this, but this is a really good resource, The Spiritual Life by Father Adolphe Tanqueray. And then this other one, which is I'd say probably a bit of an easier read. This is just called Introduction to the Spiritual Life by a guy named Brant Pitre. Brant Pitre's awesome. He's like my favorite person to listen to read. Anyway, so in this book, he talks about, of course, the spiritual life, but he also talks about different types of virtues and how those virtues can actually help us to combat against particular sins. So this is probably also another topic to talk about, but there's these 7 things called the 7 capital sins. And these 7 capital sins are things that probably we all struggle with. Maybe some of us struggle with particular ones more than others, and others struggle with particular ones more than others. But anyway, with these different capital sins, Brant Pitre suggests that we can attack them or combat against them with appropriate virtues that can match. So for example, there's the capital sin of pride, and we can combat that with the virtue of humility. He talks about envy and how we can actually be merciful toward others. He talks about anger, and meekness is the answer to anger. Avarice, so like greediness, and generosity, of course, is the natural answer. Lust versus chastity, gluttony versus temperance, sloth versus diligence, sorrow versus. So he goes through these different things, and I think it's a really nice thing. And one thing I love about Brant Pitre is that he talks about the Bible like in everything that he does. So in all of these chapters where he gets in this book, I think this is an advertisement for this book. It's not, I promise, but well, I guess it is. But he's not paying me for it because whatever. I just wish he was like my best friend. That would be a great payment. But anyway, I already have a best friend, I guess. So anyway, here's the deal. Really great thing for us to pursue the virtuous life. And so I just simply invite you, as we finish this, is I guess a little bit of a longer video, but that's okay. That's what these are for. I just invite you to consider the different virtues in your life. Specifically, I would invite you to consider these 7 that we talked about. The theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity. And just simply ask yourself that question. There we go. Just simply ask yourself that question, like, where am I really good? Where have I been blessed by God with these theological virtues? Where maybe have I been blessed with this supernatural trust and confidence that when God speaks, he speaks truly. And so I'm walking with him because of that. Where have I been blessed by God with this supernatural gift of hope, which is confidence that not only like do I trust that he's speaking truly, but that even when it gets difficult, I trust that actually, like, no matter what, he's going to lead me to it, provided I remain faithful to him, provided I remain united with him. Where have I been blessed by God with this supernatural gift of love for him, simply because of who he is? Do I have that gift? And where have I been given the supernatural gift of love of the people around me? Even the people maybe that maybe I feel like don't deserve my love. But because I've been given this virtue, then I'm actually able to love them, to choose what is good for them. Maybe I don't have warm, affectionate feelings for them, but I have this ability, this virtue of choosing what is good for people, desiring the best for people. So that's those 3. But then also prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. Do I have this virtue of being able to like discern and deliberate and determine like what's actually best for my salvation, compared to what's harmful for my salvation, and choosing the thing that is best for me? Where do I have that virtue developed? And if not, then maybe I can start developing it. Do I have the virtue of giving to others what is actually due to them, and which I suppose implies like asking the question like what do I owe this person, or what do I owe this community? Do I have a sense of justice, a virtue of justice, and actually striving to live it out, even if I wouldn't naturally choose it? Am I actually striving to live a just life? And above all, giving to God what is due to him. Where do I have this gift, or have I developed this virtue of sticking with the pursuit of a life of excellence, with energy, with ardor, with a kind of eagerness even. This sense of walking courageously toward the Lord, even though I might fail, even though I might be struggling, am I courageously pursuing to overcome the obstacles that are hindrances to my faith, hindrances to my walk with God, expanding the capacity of my soul for greatness according to what God desires. And then where or how am I developing the habit of moderate attraction towards sense pleasures? How am I developing the habit of self-mastery, ultimately, of having something that is good, but not having too much of it? Am I developing that virtue? So anyway, those are great. I hope this was helpful for you. Even just like talking about this is helpful for me, actually. So I guess selfishly, even if it's just for me, I'm happy to do it and happy to share it with you. So anyway, if you find this to be helpful, good, whatever, I just invite you to share it with other people and see if maybe together as one community united in Christ, we can pursue the virtuous life. Okay, God bless you.